CAVEaT's a project that took probably a year or so to get off the ground, and then has been open and running for nearly 2 years now. And I'm hugely grateful to HaemSTAR's contribution. You can see on the map all the sites that are taking part. There's lots. There's a little cluster here in the Thames Valley. Everyone outside of that's become involved through HaemSTAR, really. And I'm also very grateful to the National Order of Blood Transfusion here in Oxford, who've been very supportive of what we're doing. There we go. Essentially, the issue of thrombosis in the setting of cancers and thrombocytopenia is one with a real lack of data. Most of the data is retrospective. A lot of it's single center. Some cases they use a slightly odd definition of thrombocytopenia of 75, which maybe is a bit different to the way guidelines are written and with practice. So it's quite hard to do anything very informative about this on your own, which is why a lot of them come across haematology registrar's attention, which is why we thought HaemSTAR was an ideal way to support this project, to better understand how these patients are managed and what their outcomes are, which is the key point of the project. You're probably many of you are aware that there are the British Society for Haematology guidelines, and also International Society for Thrombosis and Hemostasis guidelines that cover this. I won't dwell on these, but you see there are differences between the two guidelines, which immediately is a point that we want to try and understand and capture in the study. And a lot of different people take slightly different strategies about what threshold you use to start transfusing platelets, or to start adjusting the doses of anticoagulant you're giving. Often that's low molecular weight heparin, as we'll see. So this, in contrast, is the ISTH guidelines. These are slightly more recent, and they came out just as we were opening the study. So I think the data performers do still capture whether people are following this, but that did slightly catch me out. I know the ISTH guidelines people are probably a bit less familiar with, but they make a distinction between acute thrombosis as being only the first 30 days versus beyond 30 days. And they also make a distinction between higher risk and low risk thrombosis, where low risk thrombosis is basically PICC-associated DVTs and subsegmental PEs, and everything else is high risk. And they have a more liberal strategy liberal in defense. They have a strategy with less use of platelets, potentially, for those low risk ones, where the thresholds for giving platelets are lower, down to kind of 25 or so, and you're more likely to just withhold anticoagulation rather than give platelets in order to anticoagulate the patient with the lower risk thrombosis. So how does CAVEaT work? Essentially, it's prospective. It's set up as an audit from the point of view of governance, and it takes patients who've got haematological cancers. It's an important point. Platelets of less than 50 and had a VTE within a month. And we document all of their baseline characteristics. So thankfully, hopefully, people who've done this will agree the form's not too onerous, and their outcomes at 1 month and 3 months, in terms of obviously survival and thrombosis recurrence and progression, bleeding, how many platelets they're being given, how long they're spending in hospital, and whether they're getting IVC filters. So how does it work? We get sites who are interested contact us. We send them the forms, everything you might need to register it with your clinical governance department, all the information, a kind of pre-filled out template. We need a named consultant and one or more registrar at each site, and we contact you fortnightly just to check whether you've had any cases, make sure you're still there, with the aim of trying to achieve as far as possible a consecutive series, although I think the way that COVID's disrupted everything, that's been very tricky. The forms come at the time points A, B, and C. So when the patient first has the low platelet count, a recent VTE, and then 1 month after when they had the VTE, and 3 months afterwards. So that gives you an idea of what the collection forms look like. The one on the left is A, the B and C ones are the same. A lot of them are drop-down menus, so it should only take about 10 minutes to fill in each patient. And in terms of recruitment, King's are doing very well. Very impressed with King's, and you can see lots of other sites have been doing really well also. Barts, Birmingham, Guy's, Addis, and then some smaller hospitals also contributing. That was, but no, I have updated that quite recently. So well done to those sites. To give a brief summary of the data, as of what was presented at the BSH online in autumn, we're back when we had 78 patients, median age of 64 with a slight preponderance of men, median platelet count of 34, a lot of patients with acute leukemia, 48 of the 78, and after that, well, basically lymphoma was the second largest group, and then myeloma. The sites, many of them are upper limb DVTs, as you'd expect, and that reflects what's already out there published in the literature. But a spread of other things, so Ps and lower limb DVTs, and only a small number of subsegmental Ps. A lot of them were inpatients as well. Outcomes, so as you'd expect, there's quite high rates of mortality and progression and recurrence of VTE at 12%, 9%. A third of patients had to have their management strategy changed. 3 of them had IVC filters put in, 6% had major bleeding, and 25% had non-major bleeding, requiring medical review. The median numbers of platelets in the first 28 days was 6, and the range was 0 to 53. And on average, they spent nearly half of those days in hospital. And just to show this figure briefly, there's quite a lot on there, but you're looking at different management strategies that were used. So either on the left, ISTH high risk means, or the BSH approach, you're aiming for a platelet count of 50, you fully anticoagulate them above 50, and if you try really hard to keep the platelet count above 50, and if it does drop below, then you might adjust the dose of the low molecular weight heparin below that. Then next is what the ISTHs have is the kind of low risk strategy, where you have a lower platelet transfusion threshold of 25 to 30, and you're more likely to give anticoagulation down to lower platelet counts at full doses, or accept withholding anticoagulation and not giving platelets. Then it's a similar ISTH low risk strategy is similar to that, but I've drawn that out because that means not giving the platelets at all if the platelets drop below, sorry. And then small numbers of patients on unfractionated heparin, DOAC, and no anticoagulant. And you can see in terms of the numbers, well, obviously it's not randomized data, and there are likely to be imbalances between these. But there's quite significant rates of thrombosis, progression, and recurrence in the purple, bleeding in the yellow, major bleeding in the red, and death in the black, in both those groups on the left. And that's one key thing about how we present the data at the end, is whether there's a meaningful difference there, and whether in the future it's sensible to think about trying to do some kind of randomized study in this question. So the next steps, we've so far recruitment's reached 88 eligible patients. So we were aiming for the first bit of this to get to 100. So we are very nearly there, and that, I think, is my main message today. It's all those sites who've been putting patients in. If everybody puts in one more case, then we'll have made it, and we will be writing up and looking at a manuscript. So I really encourage you to have a think whether there's been anyone very recently, or keep an eye out for cases. If sites want to register even now, you can do, but there's obviously a risk that you may not get any cases in before we reach the end of this bit of the project. In the future, in terms of the team here at Oxford, Simon Stanworth is the main consultant involved. He's very keen on the idea of trying to do a randomised question here where we have some kind of more formal registry and then assign patients to perhaps different platelet transfusion thresholds. I think there's a lot of challenges about the idea of doing that, but when the data here is complete, then that's certainly something to have a think about. So does anyone have any questions about the study or comments, if we have time?
Just thank you very much, Stephen. We're only about 5 minutes over. I mean, so maybe time for a couple of questions, but the only question I'd have is in terms of you're saying that people might not have time to sign up. Have you got a date in mind for cutting off, or is it you're going to hit 100 patients and stop?
Yeah, it's more that we're going to get to 100 patients. So, I mean, probably quite a lot of people on the call, their trust might already be registered. But if anybody is interested, if you have cases at the moment, then please do contact us. If your site's not registered and you don't have many cases, a small DGH, I think maybe this isn't the moment to join. But please do express your interest, because we'll certainly want to develop this project into the future, and we could look at including people at that stage.